And welcome in. You did it. You found it. You're at the Wild Tales podcast. I don't know how you found it, but I'm glad you did. And I'm glad you're here. Welcome in. This is Wild Tales. It's a storytelling podcast, but all the stories are animal related. Allow me to introduce myself. I am your host. My name is Mike Bona, and for over 2 decades, I've been knee-deep in the world of animals. From majestic creatures roaming our wild spaces to the quirky companions sharing our homes. I have been a zookeeper, a trainer, a conservationist. I've had the incredible privilege of working with a wide range of different species. But there's one thing I've learned. Animals have a knack for turning ordinary lives into extraordinary adventures. And that was part of the inspiration for creating this podcast, Wild Tales. This podcast isn't just about any stories. It's about the ones where our furry, feathered, or scaly friends take center stage. Whether it's a hilarious encounter, a heart-pounding escape, or a heartwarming tale of friendship, we're diving headfirst into the wild world of animal stories. So prepare for a roller coaster ride of emotions as we explore the incredible stories that happen when humans and animals cross paths. Let me get into it with our very first guest. I am extremely excited to introduce you to the incredibly talented Bradley Trevor Greive. He's an acclaimed author, illustrator, environmentalist, and conservationist. Bradley has captured the hearts of millions with his stunning artwork and inspiring messages. His Netflix special series, Adventure Beast, I highly recommend it. It's an absolute must-watch for anyone who loves animals and a good laugh. It's basically an animated conservation series, sort of like Kratts Creatures, but for adults. It's very hilarious, very quirky humor. I can't recommend it highly enough. Anyway, I'm truly excited to hear what tale he has to offer us. So without further ado, welcome in Bradley Trevor Greive.
See if we can use AI to change our voices to sound sexier.
I don't know if you can sound any sexier.
It's true.
Unless like you get a SpongeBob voice.
That would be good.
Oh, Bradley Trevor Greive, BTG. I'm so happy that you agreed to join my podcast and tell an exciting story for my 3 loyal listeners. I may be optimistic with that estimate, but
Certainly with the loyal part, yeah.
We'll see. So you have a long history of working with animals and wildlife. I asked you to pick one story, which I'm sure I could have you on every week, but I think you have time commitments.
I have 2 small children, so time is just an abstract concept for me now.
Maybe I could schedule you every morning at 2 a.m. since I know you're up at that time.
You do know I'm up because you've texted me from Africa and I was up changing diapers and we agreed that your life is now better.
I'll take it. I think one of my most favorite facts about you is your extensive list of injuries and surgeries you've had throughout your life.
It's true. I've made a very long series of poor choices to be the man that I am today. I actually lost count of how many wildlife injuries I've had. Or I know I've had somewhere up to getting close to 30 surgeries now, and I've had 8 treatments for rabies. Yeah, I feel like, you can't trust someone until they've broken a bone. I say that as a former soldier and definitely as someone in the wildlife conservation space. If someone hasn't had a treatment for rabies, I'm very dubious of their commitment to their field work.
Well, I've had the pre-exposure vaccines. I'm not sure if that counts.
Well, I've never had full-blown rabies, emphasis on full-blown. I've been bitten by animals, mainly bats and monkeys, who take a particular dislike to everything about me. And they were possible suspects for having rabies. So it's sort of, you go in there and then you get a series of 3 shots in the stomach later to make sure that you're okay. It's quite a miserable drug. And the vaccine, the other one that's awful is yellow fever, which if you go to some of the places that we like to go to, it's a good idea to be vaccinated. And when COVID hit and the vaccine came out, everyone's saying how scary it was. That's just a Wednesday for me. If I haven't got some weird drug being pumped into my body because I'm about to be bitten on the testicles by an angry monkey, I just think that I'm wasting my life.
That's good to know. You're not wasting your life. Now I'm second guessing my life choices. However, I did break a collarbone falling off my bike in the 2nd grade, so I hope I've earned your trust.
You have. you have, and you're a big guy too. So gravity's not your friend. So I do respect that.
You can relate. Let's go on to it, man. What kind of thrilling story do you have to share with our listeners today?
Well, there's a lot to choose from, most of which ended in a rather painful manner. But the one that meant the most to me was my first expedition to Kutznowu in the Alexander Archipelago in Southeast Alaska, looking at the, what have historically been known as the ABC bears, from, in English, Admiralty, then the Russian islands, Chichagov and Baranov. But of course, in Tlingit, which is the original stewards of this land, a continuous culture going back over 10,000 years, Admiralty is called Kutznowu, and that is Tlingit, means fortress of the bears. Kutz is the Tlingit word for bear, but it literally in English means armored chest, which is a reflection of how indomitable these giant Alaskan coastal brown bears are. And interesting story about this place. When the Promishlenniki, which were the Siberian fur trappers in the 1700s, made their way to the Americas, well, it was Russia, America at that time, in Alaska, they sort of went through, these are tough people, and they went through, past Kodiak and Katmai and Kenai and all the big Ks, before they get to Kutznowu, and they called the island, they see these giant bears patrolling the shore, and they call the island Ostrov Kuznoi, which means island of fear. And, obviously, if you've seen the giant bears on any of those places, for anyone to think, why would we ever go ashore there, having faced those bears, gives you some idea of how enormous these bears are. But their size varies, and there's a lot of debate about their genetic history. And I have always been interested in bears, but was never really, as someone from Tasmania, Australia, in a position to do much about it. And then, for my sins, I fell in love with an American, the glamorous and brilliant woman who's my beautiful wife and the mother of our little children, little golden cubs. And she was working for Disney at the time, and she was building, hotels and restaurants. She's an architect, among other things, at their various properties around the world. So she was off to France, and she was Japan and Hong Kong, and I'm a Tasmanian mountain man, and I come from a place where there's very few people, and I found moving to Los Angeles to be quite overwhelming. I had a farm in Tasmania, and it went on this mountain and down to the sea, and I would have maybe 6 or 7 people on the beach in front of the farm a year, and 5 of them would be penguins. So it's very sparse population. Coming here, where, with all respect to the Angelinos that I know and love, it's this giant smog bubble of angry vegans. And I really struggled to be happy here when my wife wasn't here, because I'd stay here anywhere for her, but just too many people, too many cars.
And no penguin visitors.
Very few penguins, not enough, I would say. So it was kind of frustrating. And then I just thought, why would I stay in LA and be unhappy on my own when I'm so close to some of the most spectacular bear habitat on the planet? And so I just started doing a little bit of research and found out about these Kutznowu bears and their extraordinary cultural significance to the Tlingit people. And I thought, I'm going to go for it. And so, not knowing anything or not knowing anybody, I took a plane and changed planes in Seattle, and then got to Juneau, and then got into another seaplane, and then flew to Angoon. And whenever my wife would head off to these projects, and she was going sometimes 2 weeks a month and sometimes a week a month, and I would just get on a plane and go back to Alaska. And I did it for years, but the most significant time was that first year. And it was interesting because no one would talk to me on the island, and until they found out that I was formerly a paratrooper, and they have a very honorable martial history where it's considered a very important development phase as a young person to have served in the military, whether you're Navy or God forbid, the Air Force, Marines. And so once they knew that I was a soldier, suddenly I attained personhood, as it were, and started getting to know some of the local hunters and fishers and all the rest. I actually got to speak to people, and people would guide me to show me these bears. And it was extraordinary. You imagine you spent your whole life thinking you know something about bears, but you'd never been in the wild with them. And these things are enormous. And, it was quite a shock to me, despite all the different wildlife experiences I've had, including with, giant estuarine crocodiles in Northern Australia and all the rest. Like, I've been around big predators before, but seeing these absolutely colossal bears, well over 1,000 pounds, just roaming around, and there's no moat or fence between you and them. I saw my first really big Kutchnewoo brown bear boar. I'm pretty sure I actually heard my penis gasp. It was just, oh my God, it is so big, so monumental, something as big as a bison, but, a giant carnivorous god. And it was just crazy. And I've never been one of those people to say, I know so much about an animal, I know what it's going to do. I have some idea. I've spent, 6-7 years studying these bears now. But you never really know exactly what they're going to do. And one thing that I think about all the time, speaking with other wildlife conservationists, is it doesn't matter if you're going to Kutchnewoo to see the bears. You might be going there to study their endemic dwarf squirrels. You might be going there to look at the goose-tongue grasses and various other sedges. It doesn't matter. You're sharing that same risk with these giant predators. And, every now and then, that risk does not pay off and someone gets badly injured or killed. So I have this enormous respect for other people who put their time into doing actual field work and trying to add to our body of knowledge, and people like yourself as well who get out there. Doesn't matter whether you're going into Africa to see giraffe. You're still at risk from a host of deadly carnivores and, venomous snakes and so forth. But yeah, it was an incredible experience to see how they behave. And there is these various stratum of behaviors with these bears. They're highly intelligent. The level of curiosity and caution has as much to do with their colossal size as their genetics, because they're not doing stupid things to expose themselves. This is not like Brooks Falls, where you can go there and see 20, 30 bears a day on the waterfalls picking off the salmon. These are not bears that are used to seeing people. One of the high points of my field time there was, and this is all documented in Fear Island, Fortress of the Bears, a doco that we did for Animal Planet, is we managed to, following oral history with my Tlingit brother and guide, Alvin Johnson, we managed to sort of reverse engineer this sort of 400 to 500-year-old trail that just hadn't been used, called Drum Pass Trail. The Tlingit would take from the south of the island, opposite Cake on the mainland, and make their way up through Bear Pass Mountain down into Hood Bay. And, it's called Drum Pass Mountain because the Tlingit would beat these drums as they were walking over this mountain to let the bears know they were coming and to stay at a safe distance from them. But it was extraordinary, this connection. The Tlingit look at bears as being semi-human, as sort of magical, quasi-magical creatures. And to get these stories of bears and how there are so many Tlingit stories that are teachable moments put into these sort of parables. And, how the story of people who make mistakes about the man who married the bear and the woman who married the bear, and then these giants who, the death of these giants who killed this man's brothers, and then in a very creative fashion ends up being the point of origin for mosquitoes in Alaska, because the young brother kills this giant and then he throws his body on the fire and it becomes ash, and he doesn't even want to become a pile of ash. He blows the ash into the air and the hot ashes land on his skin, and that is the sensation of the first mosquito bites. They turn into mosquitoes. But all these different stories, which now sadly have become superseded by, Sasquatch Bigfoot bullshit, and but all these origin stories run through bears about how to behave, how to acknowledge someone's true identity and true character, and, what makes the forest dangerous or safe. It's really, really interesting. I mean, there's even a clock that runs off these animal behaviors up there. So, for example, you don't eat what they call the sea vegetables, but it's really not just vegetables. It's actually mostly bivalves. So it's, razor clams, gumboots, butter clams, stuff like that. You don't touch that until after the woodcock starts calling. So this funny little bird starts calling, and that's in early spring. And once that's happened, early to mid-spring, the shellfish start building up this bacterial defense. And so if you start eating these shellfish at that time, you're very likely to get ciguatera or other horrible, stomach issues. And what's fascinating is they know this because it goes back to the bears stopped doing it. So I had this one bear we called a cub called Missy B, and not her real name. And so I could tell you when her mother was killed by another bear because I could see that she was still pulling up stones on the beaches and looking for these bivalves. And I know that her mother would have stopped that by mid-spring. So now I know her mother died almost as soon as she came out of hibernation because the little bear had not learned when to stop eating this stuff. And she was 2, and so she died. We know the mother died after she'd been weaned, but not before the mother, the young cub, had gone from milk to solid food more than one season. And so there's this whole clock system around the wildlife there, as well as this extraordinarily rich cultural history that has real practical applications to moving through the wild places of Southeast Alaska. So it was probably the richest wildlife experience I've ever had because there were so many layers to it. I mean, it's such a beautiful, rugged island, and as interesting from a botanical point of view as it is from a wildlife point of view. And as I said, the time there is, the Tlingit don't talk about time in terms of hours or days. It's talked about in terms of moons. And so everything is still about natural order. Now, when I first started going there, you couldn't even get cell phone service, which was fantastic. Now they've got some new relays and you can. But it really felt like the bear equivalent of Jurassic Park, that you were stepping back into a time of just giant beasts and unique plants. And, I expected to have a great adventure, but it exceeded my hopes and expectations on every level.
How amazing to be part of, just engulfed in that culture. And I learned so much of how their way of life and how they incorporate their lives to the bears there. So someone who hasn't seen a bear, or like for myself, who's only been exposed to our local black bears here in California, like how big are we talking?
Massive. I mean, we were looking for, on the documentary, we talked about one particular bear nicknamed Grandfather. Now, Grandfather this is what's interesting. All bears there are greeted by the Tlingit as grandmother or grandfather, depending, on their gender and age. So it's, but there's one particular bear we got photos of that was just enormous. And he was a blonde bear, which is not super common in that part of the world. They do have some lighter coloration. They have some very dark coloration, particularly in their winter pelt. And you get a lot of what we call silver tips, which is a dark bear, but you get that kind of classic grizzly V pattern around the neck, like it wearing a old-fashioned cricket sweater or something, and this light V color. And colloquially, I should say anecdotally, people talk about silver tips as being the most dangerous and aggressive of the bears. I've not seen any evidence to support that at all. But a lot of people say, oh, they're the ones that live in the mountains. Well, that's wrong on 2 levels, because the larger and more aggressive the bear, the closer it gets to the main feeding grounds, which are all at sea level, basically. So the bears that are inland and the bears that are in the mountains are usually the smaller of them. Now, there's anomalies. The bears move around. They hunt deer there. We have the small Sitka black-tailed deer, which is quite a small-sized deer. And you wouldn't think a bear could catch it, but they can. They're faster than Usain Bolt. So you don't have any chance at all. Plus, they got these giant all-wheel drive 4 giant paws, and they can run over the soft, tree fall and deadfall and moss, and the deer get their little tiny hoofs stuck in it, So they do run down deer and all the rest of it. But in terms of size comparisons, we the three large bears we were hoping to find, and we ended up just finding grandfather. Of the three large bears that we'd seen or heard about, we tracked down. We thought grandfather was definitely north of 2,000 pounds, which is colossal and easily as heavy as the largest bear ever found, which was back in Kotzebue Sound, a polar bear in the 1960s. Easily as big as the biggest polar bear ever recorded in terms of mass. But the easier way to think about it is that most people, when you think about grizzly bears, you think about, the Denali and places like that. And these bears get to be, 2 to 3 times the size of these interior grizzlies. So they're absolutely monumental. And now they have a range of sizes there. The genetics are interesting because, and this is one of the things we've set out to prove, was that one, the Kutsunuu brown bears were not identical in terms of genetics to the other ABC bears. And two, that, it was forged in the genetic union back in the last ice age, when that whole area was part of what we call a refugia, which is to say a temperate space surrounded by ice. And, this is in a place that they called Beringia, which was a giant ice bridge from, Russia to the Americas. And so this is back when you still had these what we would think of now as prehistoric megafauna, with your woolly rhinos and mammoth and all the rest of it. And so what we were trying to find out was, are the genetics, what kind of mix are they of these ancient species? And was there a connection to the American short-faced bear? And because some of the giant bears we took photographs of really had that short-faced bear, body geometry, long forelimbs, long neck, a shorter face, and huge, huge. We would look at the general rule for bears when you're trying to assess their size from a distance is whatever their height is to the hump while they're on all 4 feet, you just basically double that, and that is the top of their head when they're standing up. And, we were seeing a lot of these bears. Most brown bears don't get to, 9 feet. And we were seeing a lot of bears we were estimating that were well over 9 feet. Wow. And so these are absolute giant bears. Anyway, what we found in the end is that we collected a lot of hair samples, and at about 10 locations in some of the major bear spotting locations to the south of the island, which, as I said, other than Angoon, no one really goes there. And, it was very interesting because it came back as polar bears from, roughly 20,000 years ago, as well as brown bears, Ice Age era brown bears. But then we had, and I say we sent the samples out to Charlotte Lindquist, who's considered the top sort of bear geneticist, and she's at the University of New York in Buffalo. And we sent it over to her, and she said, yeah, you've got ancient polar bear here, you've got ancient brown bear. It is slightly different from the other ABC bears. And then we had this genetic anomaly, which we couldn't compare to anything. Because the problem with our theory of trying to compare it to a short-faced bear was that there is no short-faced bear DNA to compare it to. So all we know is we have this anomalous genetic X factor, and we can't prove it. Now, there was a project down in Mexico where they were rebuilding the genetic profile of a short-faced bear using environmental DNA. And for those who don't know what that means, it just means that we now have the technology where we don't just have to take, say, a bit of bone marrow or a tooth or whatever. If we don't have that, we can just get the tiny relics of DNA from the area where the animal was. And that is enough for us to put it all together. And anyway, they were working on that down in Mexico. And I've been waiting ever since to see what it's going to look like. And then can we compare that to what we have? But until we have that, it's just a theory. And we can't make any grand claims about being, a new species or a new subspecies and so forth. We really can't do that. And as you know, in this field, people, guard the identification of new species pretty jealously. And I remember going to giving a keynote at a tapir conference in Houston. And, everybody knows you've got your Malayan tapirs and you've got your, beds, highland and lowland. But then there's other groups saying, no, we've done this genetic research now, and there's a fourth species in the Americas. And I'm telling you, it was fighting words. People were not happy with anyone being, making any grand claim like that. It's just a very funny business. So
I know that way too well. It's happening right now with giraffes and how many species of giraffes there are. Oh yeah.
What's the theory? I'm not.
Well, IUCN still identifies them as one species of giraffe.
Really?
Divided in 9 subspecies. Giraffe Conservation Foundation, they've done the research. They've done all the genetic testing. They show that there's 4 full species of giraffes.
Wow.
The Maasai, the reticulated, the northern, and the southern.
Interesting. So what? It's just this incredibly. I don't want to slam, fellow wildlife, conservationists, but it is so strange. I mean, there's 2 different schools, right? It's like when I was a kid, I always wanted to be someone who discovered a new species. And my passion as a little kid was beetles. And, 10,000 new beetles are identified every year. So I've got a pretty good chance if that's the thing. But I still haven't done it. It's very hard to do. It's not like just finding a gold coin on the beach. It's far more difficult than that because you need to know that there's possibly gold coins in existence and how to identify it from other coins and blah, blah, blah. That analogy is going nowhere. But the point is, it's just one of those tricky things. But there is these people who are desperate, to have, the Mike Boner giraffe as a thing. And then there are those of us who go, no, let's just call it the Kutznowu bear, rather than there's these sort of imperialists who want to take it over. And even if you don't think that way, they just do not want you in the club. They just do not.
That's
and
right.
So
this isn't even like discovering a new species of giraffe. These are giraffes already recognized, but people are saying that there's 4 species, and they're like, they want their name on the paper saying, no, there's 5 species, there's 3, no, there's still only 1. Why can't we all just agree? It's for the betterment of the giraffe and conservation. And
I agree, because it dilutes the urgency for giraffe conservation if you just go, oh, they're all giraffe and we have plenty, as opposed to, well, yeah, this one's doing okay-ish, but this one is really on its last legs. And
if you can recognize the northern giraffe as its own species, they would be considered critically endangered and would require extra attention and help to maintain their existence.
Exactly. No, it's strange. Anyway, so we, as I said, we would have never had any interest in identifying this particular bear as anything but the Kutznowu brown bear.
All right. Well, I look forward to hopefully in the near future we can get more research done and find out,
I would love that. I mean,
what these bears are.
It would be fascinating. I just really want to connect the dots and find out if this anomaly, had Arctis similis in it or something else. But yeah, Ursus arctis kutznowensis, that's the goal. And, but we'll see what happens. But it is a fascinating place, and it's just so rich. I remember just spending a whole day down at, where was that bay? I'll think of it in a second. And it was high summer, and the berries were out, and they have so many different berries there. The predominant 2 species are salmon berries, which come in many colors, not just salmon pink, but and thimbleberries, which is a thimbleberry. If you haven't had one, it's like a giant button-shaped raspberry, and it tastes nice. A little bit, it's got a weird kind of rust taste to it, but it's still it's not as sweet as a raspberry. And anyway, these are very dense bushes, not that tall, maybe 12, 15 feet tall, and mostly less than that, and tricky because, as I said, I'm just giving you the guide on how to size a bear. If it's down on all fours, it could be an 8-foot, 10-foot bear, but anything behind a bush of more than 4 or 5 feet, it's invisible. And they're smart. These are not social bears as far as humans are concerned. They like to keep their distance. And so I remember we'd pull up alongside these waterways, and you see a giant copse of thimbleberries and set up some camera traps and so forth, because we know we're going to get some action there. And sometimes you get there at the wrong time or the right time, depending on what your point of view is, and this bear would just come rocketing out, and you never saw it until it was basically on you, and which is always a little bit thrilling. But I remember watching these guys, these 2 bears, and they were obviously siblings, about 3 or 4 years old, so maybe 2 brothers that were leaving their mum for the first time, because the females tend to stay with the mum for 5 years. And watching the way they were eating these berries. And one bear would stick his whole head into it like a dog into a bag of kibble and just go for it. And the other bear was standing up and guiding these berries into its mouth. Two very different, intelligent approaches. And but that's the thing. Bears are individuals, and they're divided by how their mother raised them, and their natural inclination to certain behaviors that you could just watch them all day. They're so interesting with the way that they behave. I was very careful not to get in trouble because I knew, obviously what they can do if you annoy them. It's true that most big bears are kind of binary. I'm going from point A to point B, and unless you get in between that and make them think about you differently, they're just going to generally ignore you. This is a very food-rich area, but I was not taking any risks. I did have a bear guard, but I would see it as a colossal personal and professional failure if something I did resulted in a bear being shot. That would destroy my reputation and credibility with the Tlingit people too. And by that point, I was adopted by the Tlingit, given a name and given access to certain places that no outsiders never get to see, which I hold very highly in terms of honor and value. I was just very grateful to that. But yeah, you got to be careful. I mean, we were filming that doco, and frustratingly, they sell up to 2 bear hunting permits per year, and I say I have nothing against culling animals or problem animals. I don't, but this is the highest density of brown bears in the world. We're talking it's more than one bear. It's about 1.5 bears per square mile. I mean, that's crazy. It's unbelievable how big these animals are. But because of its unique, it's so hard to get around. There's no roads. It's mountainous. It's difficult. Tons of food. Great temperate climates. 2 fish runs a year. Deer to eat, and all manner of berries and plants that are nutritious. So you get this abundance of food, and it's only sort of what we call the red wedding time, to quote Game of Thrones, when it's basically getting into autumn, and now suddenly every bear is worried they're not quite heavy enough. And that's when you see certainly the beta boars, trying to have late season sex with the females, killing cubs, that kind of thing, and big bears just eating and eating the females. That goes a little bit mental in sort of October. But the rest of the time, they kind of let you be. However, when it all goes wrong, it goes wrong very quickly and very badly. So we're getting to the end of this doco, and we had a hard out of this particular area in Chayik Bay because they'd sold one of these permits. And it's the same sort of, unctuous fat prick from the Midwest with $1 billion who buys one of these permits, because they're very expensive, and not just for the permit, but for the whole package to go there on the boat and to do the hunting. And it's really quite pathetic. Anyway, the day before we were there, we were getting incredible footage. Chayik is a very, very favored pre-hibernation destination for bears. Fatten up on usually you still get some berries there, and you get plenty of goose tongue grass, which is actually quite delicious. And so everyone talks about scat patterns and so forth. And I feel like that's a great PhD topic for somebody, because contrary to what you're told, does a bear shit in the woods? The real answer is no. If they can avoid it, they won't. They'll go to a clearing. They'll crap somewhere within about 20 feet of their daybed before they lie down. So they generally try to find a space where they can still keep visual and oral awareness in case they get attacked by another bear, while their scent function is compromised because they're taking a huge dump. Anyway, we were there filming incredible bears and these huge combined scat middens size of a tennis court. I mean, it was nothing that I had read about until we went there, and it was really interesting. But as good as it was going so well, the rest of the production team from Animal Planet, they're like, we want to keep filming. And I'm just like, we got to go. If we're down here in dark when the big units come out, it's going to be a whole lot of don't argue. We're going to be in a lot of trouble. We got to get back to the boats by dark. And they were sort of arguing back and forth. And finally, as a producer and the host, I get to sort of lay down the law and said, hey, I would love to have that footage, but it is not safe to be down in this central location when it gets dark. The big boars are going to come down. And we could hear them coming. And I remember we saw a sow with 2 cubs, and she was big too. She was almost 10 foot. She was a big bear. And she heard something and bolted straight up the mountain, just gone. And then we looked over and found a huge boar just lying on its belly looking at us from about 150, 200 yards away, just checking us out, trying to disappear. And, I'm not going to try and make it like he was trying to hunt and kill us. I don't think he was at all. But he was watching us before we saw him. And the sow knew what was good for her and her cubs. So we head back. It's about 2 miles across this kind of swampy marsh. Back, and by the time we get to the boats, it is just getting dark. And we end up having to take our little boats back in the dark without lights, which is a bit hairy. The next day, this unctuous fat Midwester with a lot of money came down there trying to get a big animal. They're supposed to get an old animal, but they're just looking for the biggest. They want its head on a wall. And he made the mistake that I avoided by staying on after dark in the hope of getting a big bear, us to film and him to kill. And he is carrying a rifle. His guide is carrying a rifle. And this huge boar just ran into him right by the water. And before they could get their rifles up or a shot off, it was on him, just like that. And didn't kill him, but certainly didn't improve his outlooks or his Hollywood headshot. And just basically slapped him around, threw him on the ground, and disappeared into this long grass. And that was it. And it was just an instant. And the guy got messed up. He had to go to hospital, etc. He didn't die. But there's everyone, all these heroic stories of I can fight a bear, I just shoot it. And it's just nonsense. And so the bear wasn't hunting him. The bear just was where it was supposed to be, and he was where he wouldn't belong. And it's just instantaneous, the amount of acceleration and power. I've seen a bear, a huge bear, one of the bears that led us to the theory about the short-faced bear genetic history. And this thing was massive. And we were sliding towards it across the water with the engine off on the boat, just drifting in quietly, taking photos and video. And we got to within 20, 30 feet of the shore when he looked up and saw us. And I swear to God, he bounced up this hill like a deer, like a pronking antelope. And this thing's well over 1,000 pounds, and he bounced like a little impala or something. It was just the craziest thing. And that's just, think about how much power it would take to move 1,500 pounds and bounce like a deer or a little dog.
That's incredible. You're supposed to be able to be quick and agile at that size. You should know.
This is true. For those that haven't met me before, I'm a man of impressive dimensions, and I make no apology for that.
So that's amazing. I seem to misplace my sympathy for that big game hunter, but that's a fascinating story. And
yeah, it was such a great. I mean, I'll admit to a certain degree of I was very smug the next day, like a poodle in skinny jeans. I was like, "Told you so," and it was just. It's so fast, and that's why I'm always a bit wary of someone that tells me they know what the animals are going to do, where they're going to be. It's never that clear. You can have a general idea, but it's not a mistake you want to make.
You always have to have respect for these animals, and you don't want to, endanger yourself or the animals for that matter.
Well, precisely. But think about the giraffe. I mean, that's a classic case. Everyone thinks of them as being like super gentle and graceful. There's some elements that are true. They will also kick you to death. And, and if you get them down on the ground by something stupid you did that startled them, that's a very serious situation for them. So, yeah. Anyway, it was an incredible experience. And, that first year, especially when I really knew absolutely nothing, it's if you get a chance to go to Kutstawu, to get into Angoon, I obviously recommend it. And,
Tell him Bradley sent you.
Yep, you can say that. And, my Tlingit name is Yakaye, but you would say that. And you would also just go to the trading post. There's only one store on the whole island. So you go to the trading post, Sue or Shane, they're the owners, and you just ask for help like I did. And they'll introduce you to somebody and they'll help you out. It's, but even if there were no bears there, you should go just because it's so beautiful. And it has, snow and ice on the mountains all year round. It's very Lord of the Ringsy, particularly the glacier down from from Drum Pass at the top of Bear Pass Mountain is really, really majestic. And that if you have the layer of ask the questions and ask about their culture, I think you'll be just as amazed and fascinated as I was.
Do you have plans to return?
Oh God, yeah. I'm actually trying to make a movie up there about an extraordinary Tlingit story about 150 years ago when a problematic naval officer shelled the village of Angoon and killed, children and starvation, and they survived because of one surviving war canoe that wasn't destroyed. They were able to save themselves from a certain death in winter, and it was quite a heroic story that most people, including Americans, don't know anything about. And they're hopefully, after 150, 60 years, they're 152 years actually, hopefully they're finally going to get the apology they've been asking for from the U.S. Navy. So there's some senior officers that are making the moves for them. But it's a fascinating part of their story. So I'm in touch with them all the time. Haven't been going back much since COVID, and because the island was locked down, and then of course we had 2 little children. So I've kind of felt a little bit bad saying, "Hey, honey, you just stay here, look after the kids while I disappear to my favorite corner of Alaska."
I know what that's like.
I bet you do.
They're supportive, but yeah, they give you that look as you walk out the door, like, really? I understand. Yeah, it's passion, but we're just live here.
It's true. Excuse me. Yeah, it's so true. It's like I'm the guy going off to face these giant bears, but she's the one that is really going to suffer.
We gotta wrap this up. I do have one question though, because these bears they are on an island, correct?
Yes.
Is it evolutionary? Is it more advantage to grow smaller on an island?
Yeah. Well, that's what's interesting. Excuse me. So first of all, they're on an island. However, because of the size of these animals, they could swim to the mainland and so forth. So it's not the truest sense of an island. But as you know, it's with endemism, you get gigantism and you get dwarfism. You get them both. And at this place, we see both. The tiny deer, the black-tailed Sitka deer, and then they have these little tiny squirrels that are about, really small. And so it's interesting because we do see these giant bears. I mean, Kodiak is an island. Some of the largest, the heaviest bears ever recorded are there. So Kodiak is a massive island. Kutznuwu is a massive island. Plus, you can swim to other islands. So that's why there's always been this connection between, Chichikov and Baranof and Kutznuwu. But, it seems to be, certainly from the genetic results that Charlotte Lindquist had, it's still slightly different. So they are staying more or less in the same place, but there is a historic connection between them. But yes, generally you would think that they would be smaller, but there are plenty of examples of gigantism as well, and this is one of those.
Good point. Well, I feel like you could talk about these bears and the people on the island forever, but I do have to cut you off at some point because this is a limited podcast. But I'm very grateful that you came on and told your story. I hope if the podcast continues, you can come back. I know you have more.
I would love to. I would always enjoy talking with you, mate. And yeah, I do. I could talk about the bears of Kutznuwu forever. It's just, and the stories and the cultural, tapestry, the whole thing is set in, which makes it all the more magical. I've been to, as I'm sure you have, you've been to a particular place to see a specific thing, and maybe you found it and maybe you didn't. I think most of my trips have been barely successful or not successful at all. I remember riding my motorbike across Australia to see whale sharks in the Indian Ocean and not finding them, and crashing my bike as well. And then I had friends just flew in for like 3 days and saw them 2 out of the 3 days. But sometimes even when you fail to find what you set out to see, you still have an incredible experience because of everything else that you weren't looking for. And that's always been my experience with Alaska, with particularly the Alexander Archipelago. This is why I get so annoyed about fake natural history and Bigfoot nonsense, because you cannot be out in the field for a few days, a few weeks, and not find a million things you hadn't expected. I remember coming across all these rough-bellied newts, very, very deadly poisonous newts. I wasn't there to see newts, but here they all were down by this waterway, and I was amazed. I didn't even know there were newts there. And it's the unexpected discoveries that keep you excited about getting out into the wild. So yeah, I love these giant bears. They fascinate me. I love the cultural richness of the Klinger connection with wildlife. I've seen their 10,000-year-old fish traps. It's amazing to see them, to be living history in that. But at the same time, it's the astonishing, embarrassment of wonders of all the things we have never seen or known that make it an addiction as much as it's a personal, defining cause.
I hear you. Yeah, I think we both have an appreciation for not only the big things in nature, but also the smaller things we can appreciate, the newts and the
that's right,
squirrels and the birds and the plants.
Hashtag go newts.
Go newts. All right. Well, thank you very much. Anything you'd like to close out with before we log off?
Yeah, no. No other episode of this podcast will be as good as this one, so just keep replaying it.
Sounds good. It might be good advice. I'll consider it.
All right, man. Thanks for having me. All the best to you and to your listeners, and hopefully cross paths again soon.
No, we will. Thank you very much. Take care.
Cheers.
All right, man.
Too easy.
Too easy.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. If you enjoyed listening to Bradley Trevor Greive, he is a great dude. Follow him on Instagram at Tasmanian_Grizzly. Let him know you heard him on the Wild Tales podcast. And follow Wild Tales while you're at it. I'm on Instagram at Wild Tales. That is TAILS, Tales as in animal tales. It's not like story tells. It's incorrect on purpose. It's a pun. Okay, just go with it, please. It's fun. It's supposed to be fun. Anyway, and if you have any questions or want to add some input or maybe have a story yourself you'd like to share, you can email the podcast at wildtalespod, again TAIL tail, wildtalespod @gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you and just get an idea of who's listening. How'd you find us? Please continue to listen. Let me try that again. Please continue to listen. I'm all tongue-tied at the end. This has been a long episode. I don't think they're all going to be this long, but I'm going to wrap it up. I got some great guests coming up in the future, so please subscribe and continue to listen, and I can't wait to hear from you. Stay wild, my friends.